I was, well, I still am very involved in DMT research. So I'm studying endogenous DMT in mammals and also exogenous DMT in rats. And this project here that I'm going to present today was sort of a COVID side project. Work in the lab got shut down, and we wanted to get involved in some survey work. So we did a few different projects on understanding naturalistic psychedelic use. And this project here, which I'm going to present today, it was just published earlier this year in the Journal of Psychoactive Drugs. And we were looking at knowledge, perceptions, and use of psychedelics among individuals with fibromyalgia. So I'll just talk about that today. And just going to move my video over here. And as you mentioned, yeah, I'm at the University of Michigan, Department of Molecular Integrative Physiology, and Department of Anesthesiology. So just to start off, I'll cover a brief introduction on psychedelics, even though I'm sure a lot of us have, treaded the territory and know a lot of its background. But I'd like to first define psychedelics with this definition that I think is really useful. And this comes from Goodman and Gilman's Pharmacological Basis of Therapeutics. And the definition reads: the feature that distinguishes the psychedelic agents from other classes of drug is their capacity reliably to induce states of altered perception, thought, and feeling that are not experienced otherwise, except in dreams or at times of religious exaltation. Now, this is probably pretty familiar to all of us, but it's I think it's very important to lay the foundation for how we're defining psychedelics. And one of the most interesting things about psychedelics is that there's multiple classes of psychedelics. So these experiences akin to dreams or religious exaltation can be brought about with different pharmacological agents. So that's one of the most interesting things about psychedelics in my mind. And I'm just going to cover those three different classes of psychedelics just briefly here. So the first one I'll talk about is tryptamines. And tryptamines are also known as serotonergic psychedelics. And they're called serotonergic psychedelics for a couple of reasons. And the first one is because the structure of the tryptamines, shown here, LSD, psilocybin, and DMT, are very structurally similar to the endogenous neurotransmitter serotonin. This is an indole group with an amino side chain, and this is present in, you can see LSD also in psilocybin and DMT. And another reason they're called serotonergic psychedelics is because they're thought to act primarily on the serotonergic system, which may be a correlate of their subjective effects. So LSD, is I'm sure most of us know, is the most potent of the tryptamine psychedelics. It has active doses in the microgram range, and effects last up to 10 to 12 hours. Psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, and DMT also, which is present in hundreds, if not thousands, of species of plants, as well as in most mammalian species that have been studied. And moving on to phenethylamines. So these are characterized by their phenethylamine backbone structure, which is an endogenous compound as well. And the two most notable phenethylamines are mescaline and MDMA. Mescaline has a very long duration of action, can last for up to 24 to 36 hours, and is a natural compound in various species of cacti. MDMA, as I'm sure we all know, is otherwise known as ecstasy, and has shown a lot of therapeutic potential in terms of treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. And finally, the dissociatives. Ketamine and ibogaine are the two that I've highlighted here. And ketamine has long been used as an anesthetic for various purposes, and it's an extremely safe and well-tolerated anesthetic. But the interesting thing is that at sub-anesthetic doses, ketamine produces psychedelic or dissociative type effects. And ketamine has a long history in being effective for treating various forms of mental illness, including depression and anxiety, and also a few different pain conditions as well. And then ibogaine is the active compound in various species of African plants and shrubs, and has a very long duration of action, and is being investigated for substance use disorders and a few other things as well. So, as I'm sure most of us know, psychedelics have a huge amount of therapeutic potential. It's all over the news. There's this psychedelic renaissance occurring. Pretty much everywhere you look, you hear stories of, the psychedelic revolution is coming, or, psychedelics being able to reset different aspects of our our brain function, et cetera. And most notably, so psilocybin and LSD have been shown to be effective or potentially effective in treating anxiety and depression associated with terminal illness, treatment-resistant depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, substance use disorders, as well as acute pain and cluster headaches. MDMA, very promising results treating post-traumatic stress disorder, and ketamine, as I mentioned before, treatment-resistant depression and anxiety, substance use disorders, and pain management as well. And all of these psychedelics are used in conjunction with psychedelic therapy. So that we're talking about psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. And going back to the original point, it's interesting that all of these different pharmacological, structurally distinct drugs can have similar effects and can also treat similar conditions. So it's still being studied. We still don't know what the subject, what the mechanisms are for the therapeutic effects of these different psychedelics. And there's a number of different hypotheses that exist, and this is an actively hot topic in research currently. So one possible mechanism of the therapeutic potential of psychedelics are the subjective effects themselves. And this includes, as I mentioned, the therapeutic session and the therapeutic alliance between the therapist and the client. Also, the occasioning of mystical type experiences, or the experiences of religious exaltation, like I mentioned in the definition before. And also this idea of increased psychological flexibility. So being able to look at internal and external events in your life and having more flexibility or freedom to interpret those things in new ways. Another possible mechanism is pharmacological or molecular, and that involves neuronal signaling, including activation of serotonin 2A receptors, which produces glutamatergic signaling, most notably in cortical layer 5 pyramidal neurons. And this is a mechanism that occurs with the serotonergic psychedelics, psilocybin, LSD, and DMT, and also with ketamine. And this is a mechanism that promotes production of things like BDNF and potentially may lead to neuroplasticity and increased cognitive flexibility. And then finally, the alterations in brain network activity might also be a very important mechanism for the subjective effects of psychedelics. And this is a very highly cited image that I'm sure many of us have seen before, but it's just showing that compared to placebo, psilocybin can induce a higher repertoire of brain states and also a higher amount of communication between brain regions that normally don't communicate. And this is just one measure of brain network connectivity. You know, we can look at other things like EEG measures of complexity or coherence, or fMRI measures. And there are many distinctive features using those measures when various psychedelics are administered. And these may be a correlate of some aspects of the subjective experience. So we know that there's a large psychological flexibility, there's changes in brain network activity, and there's molecular changes happening. But how do these changes relate to chronic pain? And is there any evidence for psychedelics treating chronic pain? So currently there have been no clinical trials, and basically the only thing we have to rely on are a few case reports and some survey type studies. But there were a few case reports in the last 2 decades showing that psychedelics have been effective for treating cluster headaches, which are very debilitating and extremely painful headaches. And in these 2 studies, it was shown that psychedelics resulted in shortened cluster headache attacks, and using psychedelics during cluster period resulted in partial or complete cessation of attacks. So promising results with cluster headaches that hasn't really been revisited since these studies. And also phantom limb pain. So this is an older study citing here, and it was a very small study, but 5 out of 7 people with phantom limb pain who received LSD reported improved pain and decreased analgesic use. And that I know that there's funding out there, and there currently clinical trials underway or planned to test the effects of psilocybin on treating and improving the conditions of phantom limb pain. So moving on to fibromyalgia, which is the condition that we were interested in looking at for this study. And the reason we're interested in looking at it is because it's basically the hallmark of chronic pain. It's, there are many comorbid symptoms associated with fibromyalgia, and its symptomology is very diverse. So it includes various centrally mediated symptoms, including sleep disorders, memory impairment, and anxiety and depression, as well as other symptoms, including nausea, weight gain, and a number of other things. But the most hallmark symptom of fibromyalgia is chronic pain on multiple portions of the body. So widespread chronic pain, and it affects a surprisingly large portion of the population. Up to 8% of the population suffers from fibromyalgia, and there's a large need for increased treatment options for this condition, because the current pharmacological therapies are largely inadequate, and they have modest therapeutic impact and a lot of side effects. Generally, the treatment plan is generally non-pharmacological, and it includes things like yoga, stretching, exercise, stress reduction, maybe improved sleep quality. All those things can improve the condition of fibromyalgia, but the pharmacological therapies are very inadequate. So as you can imagine, there's a very strong interest in alternative therapies to manage the number of symptoms that are associated with fibromyalgia. So in order to get an idea of what the landscape is in terms of the relationship between fibromyalgia and psychedelics, there were no studies conducted previously, so we decided to team up with the National Fibromyalgia Association and conduct an anonymous online survey across the United States. And we did this using Qualtrics survey software, and sent the survey anonymously across the United States. And the main goal of the study was to, characterize knowledge, perceptions, and past use of psychedelics among individuals with fibromyalgia. And two of the pain measures that we used to assess pain and fibromyalgia were the brief pain inventory and the 2011 fibromyalgia survey criteria. So just looking at our sample selection here, 610 people started the survey and 481 completed it. And then we subjected those 481 responses to exclusion criteria. And individuals were only included in the study if they had experienced pain for greater than or equal to 6 months, or rate their pain greater than or equal to 4 on a scale of 0 to 10. So they do have a chronic pain condition. They must have been older than 18 years old. They must be able to read and speak English, and they must have specified their geographic location. And then they must have also reported a previous fibromyalgia diagnosis. So everybody in the study had previously been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and they self-reported it in this study. So that gave us a total of 354 responses for the final analyses. And then from that final sample size, we did a few different subgroupings. And the most important subgrouping is splitting up the sample into those who had never tried psychedelics and those who had tried psychedelics. And these were our two subgroups for the majority of the study. And then just jumping into the demographics and looking at the pain scores among the two groups. So here's just a summary of one of the tables from the paper. And you can see the two groups here. So we have the group that never used and the group that had used psychedelics. And then we have t-test and p-values for a comparison between those two groups. And what you can see is that it was a largely biased population toward female. So nearly about 90% of the entire sample population was female. And it was also a very white population as well. So about over 90% of the population was white. So unfortunately, we didn't get the diversity that we'd hoped for. But the population was also had relatively high income, was well educated, And notably, when we look at the three measures for pain and fibromyalgia, we see that there are no significant differences between those who had never used and those who had used psychedelics. So this is the fibromyalgia score, brief pain inventory of pain severity, brief pain inventory of pain interference, and we see no differences between the groups that had and had not used psychedelics. And then moving on to a summary of the knowledge and attitudes toward psychedelics. So when considering the overall sample, the N equals 354 participants, most people perceive psychedelics as having very little to moderate overall danger. And this is in terms of perception of physiological or physical potential harm. So very little to moderate perception of danger. Most participants were interested in learning more about psychedelics. So we asked them on a scale of 0 to 5, how interested are you in learning more about psychedelics and the potential for treating chronic pain? And we saw a moderate to great interest there. And then we also saw a moderate amount of perception of individuals thinking that psychedelics have potential for treating chronic pain. So when we asked how much potential do you think psychedelics have for treating chronic pain, and we saw a moderate amount there. And then interestingly, 70% indicated moderate through extreme likelihood of participating in a hypothetical clinical trial of psychedelics for their chronic pain. So we said if a clinical trial for chronic pain existed using psychedelics, would you participate? And 70% said moderate through extreme likelihood. And then if we compare those who had versus had not used psychedelics, we see that the participants who had used psychedelics in the past had a lower perceived risk, as well as greater knowledge, interest, and likelihood of participating in a clinical trial. So this, I think, suggests that individuals with experience of psychedelics are a little bit more comfortable with the experience and are less concerned about psychedelics having risk, and they also have naturally more interest in psychedelics as well. LSD and psilocybin mushrooms were the most commonly used psychedelics in this study, and the reasons for psychedelic use were mostly for fun, but notably over 13% used psychedelics with the intention to treat their chronic pain. And then looking now at self-reported changes in overall health associated with psychedelic use. So these are just some simple pie charts put together from the data. And this is looking at only the individuals who reported past experience with psychedelics. And this could be any psychedelic. And with the overall group, so the 106 individuals who had used psychedelics, we see about 60% of them reported no change in their overall health as a result of that experience. Over 36% reported that psychedelics made their health better, and then less than 3% said that psychedelics worsened their health. And then we subgrouped this 106 into two other subgroups. So 14 of those actually used psychedelics with an intention to treat their chronic pain. And of those 14, over 70% reported that the psychedelics made their health better. And about 20% said that there was no change in their health. And then the individuals who use psychedelics for other reasons, not to treat their chronic pain, these results largely mirror the overall sample, with about 65% no change, 31% made health better. And then narrowing in a little bit more, looking at self-reported changes in pain associated with psychedelic use. And this is a smaller sample size because it's only considering the 36 participants who reported having chronic pain when they took the psychedelics. So unfortunately, one limitation of this study is that many people, well, all of the people have a fibromyalgia diagnosis, but some of them took psychedelics before they had received that diagnosis. So this is looking at the small group that actually used psychedelics after they had received a fibromyalgia diagnosis. And in that overall 36 sample of 36, 50% of them said that there was no change in their pain as a result of using psychedelics, and nearly 50% said that it made their pain symptoms better after using psychedelics. And then Of those 36, 12 people actually took psychedelics with the intention to treat their pain. And of those, 11 out of the 12 people reported that the psychedelics made their pain symptoms better. And then of those who used psychedelics for other reasons, when they had a fibromyalgia diagnosis, 70% no change, and 25% made their pain symptoms better. And the takeaway from these last two slides, I think, is that psychedelics are very well tolerated among individuals with fibromyalgia, and very few participants reported any negative health outcomes as a result of psychedelic use. And the cool thing about survey projects is you can also take qualitative data, and you can allow people to fill in responses and have a sort of a open response. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of these as I wrap up here. So this table is split top and bottom. On the top part is participants who reported chronic pain symptom improvement following psychedelic use, and the bottom part is those who did not report symptom improvement. And this female, 55-year-old female who was experiencing chronic pain for greater than 30 years and who consumed LSD, she said that I experienced a profound feeling of being pain-free, and as if the weight of my illness had been literally lifted. Did not realize the physical heavy feeling my body exists in every day. Felt actually lighter on my feet. And this female, age 55, who had been experiencing chronic pain for over 20 years, consumed ayahuasca and said that it decreased my pain level significantly for about a year and allowed me to stop taking medication for my pain. My pain has increased in the past few months, but it is still less than before the experience. So these two anecdotes highlight this idea of potentially having psychological flexibility and a physical release from some of the pain symptoms associated with their condition. And then we also have a couple here of those who did not report symptom improvement. And this 23-year-old female who used LSD said that I took a walk and all the pain was still in my body. I still had IBS cramps. I still needed to rest mid-trip in pain like I do every day. It helps me enjoy and have thoughts, but it doesn't touch the pain. And then a 63-year-old male who had experienced chronic pain for over 30 years said that although I found great insight and it's a break from the pain, I feel my body's in bad shape. I feel that psychedelics can be helpful for moderate pain. I don't think that it is helpful for severe pain. So it's always important to consider that no matter how promising the results are, these treatments and naturalistic use of these substances is not a panacea, and it's not going to be ideal for every situation and every condition. But just a quick summary and main conclusion from the study is that over 30% of the population reported past use of psychedelics, and we saw there was no difference in pain or fibromyalgia scores between those who have versus have not used psychedelics. And we see that psychedelics are perceived as generally safe and have moderate potential as chronic pain treatments. And there's moderate to great interest in learning more about the therapeutic potential of psychedelics. And when considering the subgroup that had previously used psychedelics, the changes in overall health and pain were neutral or improved, especially when used with the intention to treat pain. So we can say that among this population of individuals with fibromyalgia, psychedelic use is well tolerated, and there is substantial interest in psychedelics as a possible chronic pain treatment. So a couple limitations here, and then I'll wrap up with a final slide. So I mentioned a few of these before. Cross-sectional survey design, we're just taking one snapshot of individuals' lives during a single survey. We don't have any information about what happened before or after that survey. And the sample population was restricted to the US. As I mentioned, it was mostly white and female. And most participants actually did not take psychedelics when they had fibromyalgia. So we're talking about past use of psychedelics mostly. And we also have issues with selection bias and self-reporting biases. But the main drive for conducting this survey study was because we have an upcoming clinical trial to test the safety and preliminary efficacy of psilocybin among individuals with fibromyalgia. And this trial has a planned start date of late 2022. And with this trial, we'll be administering 2 psilocybin dosing sessions, a low and a high, and we'll use the classic model of psychedelic assisted therapy with prep sessions before and integration sessions after. And we'll be administering multiple pain questionnaires, we'll do quantitative sensory testing, and a battery of different neurophysiological measurements as well, including EEG, fMRI, and sleep analysis. And then we'll wrap up the study with 3- and 6-month follow-ups And we're excited about this clinical trial. And this is going to be, I believe, the first trial to assess the efficacy of the psilocybin for fibromyalgia. So very excited about that. And then just to acknowledge the co-authors, Jen Pierce, Alan Davis, Jim McAfee, and the PI pictured there, Kevin Banke, who's going to be running the clinical trial, and then the support of the departments I work in, and also the survey participants for completing the survey and making this study possible. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was such a great talk. Super exciting to hear that there's a clinical trial coming out. You'll definitely have to keep us updated on the results with that. We'll just head into the Q&A. Just a reminder to the audience, you can drop a message in the chat, raise your hand, or you can send me a direct message as well. So we have a couple here actually to get through. So the first one for you is, you mentioned the homogeneity of the survey population, predominantly white and female. How does this correspond to the demographics of the population with the diagnosis?
Yeah, it doesn't exactly match up to the actual demographics of people who have fibromyalgia. It actually is more, it's a disease that's more prominently seen in females than males. I think it's about a 2-to-1 ratio of female to male. And that's historically because when they first diagnosed fibromyalgia, they assessed tender points on the body, and they would basically, give a stimulus, a touch stimulus on various tender points, and find out how severe the pain is on these various tender points. And it's a certain phenomenon that females actually are more sensitive to this type of condition, this type of stimulus than males are. And they've since changed the criteria for fibromyalgia diagnosis, but even then, there's still a higher proportion of females that have the condition than males. And as far as white, it's definitely not a 95% white disease or condition. I'm not sure of the demographics exactly, but our results are certainly not in line with the actual demographics.
And would you have any reason to think that, the response to psychedelics for males versus females with fibromyalgia might be different?
I mean, I could guess and I could speculate, but I don't have a reason for why that might be. I mean, I'm not sure if there's even really been an extensive study to compare just the subjective effects between males and females. I'm not too sure.
I guess we'll find out with the clinical trial.
Yeah.
So we know that there's next question here is that we know that there's a large mental component to pain. Do you think, the mechanism behind these improvements that are being reported, do you think it's more of a mental aspect potentially, or pharmacological, or a mix of both?
Yeah, that's why I wanted to touch on all of the different potential mechanisms of psychedelic action, because there is actually a descending pain pathway, from the spinal cord into the periphery, and that's mediated by serotonin 2A receptors. So the activation of these serotonin 2A receptors could possibly provide some sort of inhibitory action on some of the descending pain pathways. But also, as you mentioned, there's certainly a psychological component to pain, and this condition, fibromyalgia, is also comorbid with many other mental health conditions. So in my mind, it's much more conceivable to think that the psychological flexibility, the subjective effects, and the sort of cognitive rewiring is likely the more predominant mechanism, in my opinion. And that's also true because with fibromyalgia, the more effective treatments, I think, are non-pharmacological. As I mentioned, like exercise, improved sleep, reduced stress, yoga, acupuncture, Tai Chi, like all those things are recommended for individuals with fibromyalgia. And those things can certainly provide psychological relief just equally as much as they provide any kind of physiological relief.
Awesome, thank you. Another question here. So studies have shown that past psychedelic use is one of the primary factors affecting attitudes towards the psychedelic experience. Are there other factors you found that were related to positive attitudes towards psychedelics, or do you think that this could potentially be a factor that might have been driving benefits that were found in this study?
Right. So I think that's certainly one of the potential biases. So we definitely have a selection bias. So we did advertise through the Fibromyalgia Association, but we also advertised through social media and psychedelic related social media. So I would imagine that many people who have a predisposition to have an interest or a support of psychedelic therapies were answering the questionnaire based on that predisposition. So there's certainly a bias that exists there. And I'm not sure what the second part of that was, but hopefully that answered it.
Yeah, no, they're just wondering if there was any other factors that you thought might be related to positive attitudes towards psychedelics and their whole experience with it.
Yeah. I don't think anything really popped out in the analysis that's coming to mind. I don't think so.
Awesome, thank you. All right, well, in the interest of time, we will be closing out the Q&A now, but thank you so much, Nick. That was a really interesting talk, and I know I'm very excited. Oh, sorry, one last question, actually. It seems that more people who took psychedelics with an intentionality to reduce pain experienced improved symptoms. Oh, sorry, I think you've actually kind of already answered this. It was just saying, I've heard that it's better to set an intention before taking psychedelics. Do you think this might have an impact? I guess this leads into also, would you expect, with this clinical trial where they're actually getting the assisted therapy model and they're having, the prep and the integration, would you expect that to have a large impact potentially on, the benefits that you may see with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And we, those who designed the study thought that it was very important to include the preparation and integration sessions, just because, the idea of setting and preparation is, I think, it's been shown to be critical for the success of psychedelic therapies. So yeah, and it was our sample size was very small for that intention setting sort of piece, but it was really interesting that came out that way. And we've actually done sort of a follow-up study or something similar and shown some similar results where individuals who actually have the intention to improve a certain aspect of their life before they consume the psychedelics seem to have more success with that. And I'm pretty sure that's been published in the literature as well too. So it wasn't too surprising.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you again. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of the clinical trial. Please definitely keep us updated once you have results from that.